The Heavenly Demon. Can't Live a Normal Life. By Sanchin. Chapter 19. Blind Trust. Part 1. Roman's question to Hans was straightforward. Hans, have you ever seen me taking drugs, or have there been any situations where it was presumed that I took drugs? Huh? Hans was startled. What does he mean by taking drugs? Hans thought he had been called to run an errand as usual, but he couldn't hide his embarrassment at Roman's sudden question. And Roman was sure he would have that reaction. Hans was close to the past Roman, so he would definitely know whether Roman was taking drugs or not. Roman continued, I don't mean to punish you or anything. However, I just want to take some time to reflect on my past life and actions. I want to check how I lived my life through the eyes of a bystander, not my own memories. He didn't add any excuses. He didn't know Roman's memories due to his reincarnation. Some would ask many questions and search for an explanation, but it wasn't necessary for Roman. He just asked his question straightforwardly. The problem was with Hans. Unlike usual, he showed some signs of hesitation, but then, he had a serious expression as if he had made his decision. The young master I recently experienced is not someone who would ask things like this in vain. He really wants to check the circumstances and know if he was using drugs from another person's perspective, so I should be honest about what I know. I've never seen the young master take drugs. However, there was a time when your behavior was a little strange. When was that? I think it was a fortnight ago. The young master had gone to a banquet for the first time in a long time. Actually, the banquet wasn't anything special, but after returning from it, the behavior of the young master was a bit strange. From that day onwards, you refrained from going out and stayed in your room while demanding excessive amounts of alcohol every night and looked lifeless. During that period, I suspected the young master might have taken some manner of drugs at the banquet. On the day Roman committed suicide, Hans looked at Roman, possessed by Baek Jung-hyuk, while being suspicious of drugs being used. Recently, it had been a problem among the nobility, so he was considering the possibility that Dimitri's fool had taken drugs as well. But other than that, I don't think there were any other incidents. Honestly, now I know how foolish I was back then. There is no way the strong and intelligent young master would have ever touched drugs. Now it was clear that it was simply a matter of suspicion. Hans trusted Roman would never take drugs. The cleverness he had shown in the process of subjugating the blood fang was something that a drug addict could never show. It was at the banquet *. Roman was deep in thought. The banquet. It was a familiar word to Roman now. Things had changed after Roman attended a banquet, and not long after that, he had made the drastic decision of suicide. Even the rumors that Flora had heard had come from a banquet. Then, he asked, who was in charge of the banquet I attended? The root of the problem. It was essential for Roman to find it. And then, Hans answered, you had attended the Barco family's banquet, young master. Barco. It was that moment when things entered a new phase. The explanation of Hans was simple. You had known the eldest son of the Barco family for a long time. After the marriage conversation with Lawrence, the relationship began to falter. However, none of the noble children got along with the young master as well as he did. So, it wasn't too unusual for you to attend the Barco family's banquet. I thought you would still have a good relationship with him because you knew each other even before the marriage. Conversation. Barco's eldest son, Anthony Barco, was a man who had a bad reputation among the nobles, just like Roman. That was how the two bonded. Coming from two powerful families in the northeast region, the two men with bad reputations often played together. The two of them probably weren't close friends. Since they had a similar reputation, it must have been that they were simply hanging out together as friends for entertainment. However, the relationship then became entangled due to Flora. Anthony Barco wanted to marry Flora, and Roman was no different. And the winner of that battle was Roman. It's because the Lawrence family, who ultimately rejected Barco, decided that Dimitri was better than Barco. The puzzle pieces were finally put into place. Roman received Barco's invitation and attended the banquet. As Roman decided to resort to suicide after that, the cause was definitely in Barco. The only reasonable conclusion I can reach in a situation like this is that Barco induced Roman's suicide. If Dmitri became one with Lawrence, Barco would not be able to claim Flora or Lawrence's fertile land. And the simplest way to solve that problem is to prevent the marriage from happening in the first place. From what Hans had heard, Barco had previously wished to marry Lawrence, so now the only way left for them to do so was to either induce a breakup or create a situation in which Dmitri and Lawrence could not get married. Roman saw the big picture. The people who would benefit the most from Roman's death were Barco. I don't know how they led Roman to commit suicide, but they must have tried various methods to achieve their goal. Spreading obscene rumors and inducing a breakup were simply things they tried since it could have driven Roman to commit suicide. There is trash everywhere. The truth was not great but disappointing. Since he decided to live the life of Roman, the name Barco automatically touched Roman's nerves now. Just then, Hans said, "In fact, a few days ago, Barco sent an invitation to a banquet. I couldn't deliver it to the young master because you had gone into closed door. Seclusion, how do we deal with this? Did Barco invite me?" "Yes." Pfft. Roman started laughing. They were blatantly ignoring him. No matter what kind of harm Anthony did to Roman, he was bold enough to confidently send invitations to see him again. It's annoying. I don't like it. It was now clear as day that the enemy was Barco. In order to continue living peacefully as Roman in the future, it was necessary to quickly clean up the annoying parts of his life. Tell them that I will be attending the banquet. Face the problems head-on. That was the way Roman would live in the future. The banquet was scheduled to be held 2 weeks later. Roman, who had time to spare, went to visit Kevin, who had been waiting for him since he entered closed-door seclusion. "What should I do now, young master?" Kevin lowered his head. He had accepted Roman's offer back then, but the problem was that there was nothing he could do for Roman. He was just a teenage boy. He was born with a talent as ordinary as a pebble on the side of the road. He could not come up with an answer about his role, no matter how much he had thought about it for the past week or so. So he decided to ask about his own role in Roman's life. Why did he accept someone like him? Roman said, "I want to use you as my sword. However, the use of a person is not determined by the will of others. So, from now on, I will tell you 3 ways so that you can choose for yourself." It was surprising. He wanted to use Kevin as his sword, even though Kevin had never touched a sword in his life. It was a remark that could not be understood with common sense, but Kevin did not raise any objection to Roman's words. The first is to give up your use as a sword. If you are afraid to hold the sword and don't want to bleed, then be my hands and feet, not my sword. You can do your part by following Hans, learning what he does, and doing the non-dangerous tasks I order you to. That was a safe option. Roman did not force him to risk his life for him. Forcing others to risk their lives created variables, and Roman did not want to keep a weak human being by his side as his sword. The second is to protect me as a sword. However, in your mid-teens, there is no way for you to become strong quickly, as you have never touched a sword or trained till now. The world is not a beautiful fairy tale. It takes a lot of willpower to become strong, even if you train for a long time. I will test your will myself if you choose the second option. It will be a method in which you will suffer pain as if your muscles and bones were being torn apart at the same time. It won't be an easy decision, but it will show me a result that will prove your will. Just hearing those words made Kevin anxious and his mouth dry. Honestly, when Roman accepted Kevin, he thought maybe Kevin could handle his final ordeal. The third. He drew his sword. And then. Clank. Cut off your hand with this sword. If you can endure the pain of cutting yourself, you will be able to grow faster than anyone else. He threw the sword in front of him. For the first time, a feeling of fear erupted on Kevin's face, who had shown his willpower until recently. The crazy demon. When I first met him, the crazy demon was just a little boy, like Kevin, who didn't know the of martial arts. However, how was he able to grow and become one of the 4 heavenly kings? Thanks to his natural talent? No. His growth came solely from his strong will. There are numerous ancient martial arts in the demonic cult treasury. Among them, the demonic spirit art turned several members who pursued strength into lunatics with powerful demonic energy. The crazy demon learned how to become a sword that could be useful to me. By overcoming the ordeal of learning the demonic spirit art, he became a sword I could trust. Demonic spirit art. It's a dangerous martial art. When one uses that martial art, their mind is inevitably eaten away by demonic energy. In exchange, it allows them to exert explosive power while feeling pain as if their body was being torn apart. In fact, the pain is so terrible that ordinary people cannot even think of facing it. Roman gave the last suggestion because the demonic spirit art can be learned by one who can handle the pain of cutting off their own arm. However, no one with an ordinary will can even dream of learning it. That's precisely why I chose the demonic spirit art. I don't think Kevin can really handle the demonic spirit art, but I want to give him a choice at least. Roman said, in order for an ordinary person to transcend the limits of their talents, it takes a lot of sacrifice and willpower. You are already mine. Whatever choice you make, I will make sure to use you as well as I can. So, you should decide how you will be useful to me. The ball was in his court. Kevin swallowed dry saliva. His eyes looking down at his sword trembled with terror, and his mouth was so dry that there was no saliva to swallow. Cutting off one's own arm was brutal. How could Roman suggest such a thing? Pant, pant. His breath became heavy. He wasn't sure if this was the right thing to do, but at least he had faith in Roman, who was looking at him. He completely believed in Roman. Just like when Roman had saved him from the blood fawn, he believed that Roman would save his life this time as well. I'll do it. He clenched his teeth. In fact, he clenched them so hard that he could almost feel his teeth grind. Clack! Kevin grabbed the sword. Just when Kevin was about to cut off his arm, Roman's eyes lit up. Demonic art of hallucination. At the same time, mana began to swirl. Kevin's eyes turned hazy as soon as Roman used the demonic cult's martial arts. The demonic art of hallucination, known to have deceived many people's souls in Murim, was displayed by him. Then, Kevin fell to the floor. In the real world, his face is buried dead on the floor, but in his hallucination, it's not much different from when he was about to cut off his hand with the sword. Now, Roman focused on the hallucination. And finally, slash! Kevin's face contorted in pain. Chapter 20. Blind Trust. Part 2. Kevin was born outside the Dmitri castle. He lived in a shack so run down that it could not even be called a home, and he followed his parents from a young age to help earn money. He started with simple errands, and there was nothing he didn't end up doing. He lived the life of the poor and didn't even dare to dream big or set goals because he was born in poverty. But still, he wanted to live like everyone else. Rather than the life of a hero from a fairy tale, he just hoped for a life where he wouldn't have to worry about tomorrow's meal. And that's why. Shudder. Pant, pant. His hands trembled. A cold sweat ran down his forehead, and his gaze on his hand was blurred due to vertigo. His own hand. Was it okay to cut it? Roman did not force him to make a specific choice. Following Hans would obviously give him the life he had hoped for a long time, but in Kevin's mind, he could still vividly remember the day he first met Roman. Roman was strong. He was a man who could take responsibility for his words, and he casually subjugated the blood fawn, whom Kevin could not even dare to touch. The fact that Roman had power seemed so great. He had always lived a life in which he was used by others and was robbed of the things he wanted, so he couldn't ignore this moment when Roman presented him with a choice. Young Master Roman promised me a new life. So, I have to become someone who's useful to him. He clenched his teeth. And then, Slash. Arg. He slashed at his hand. Due to the sensation of the sword cutting through his flesh, his mind, which had been accustomed to the pain of being beaten by others, was destroyed at once. Moreover, the problem was that he hadn't completely cut off his hand yet. The blade Roman had given him was blunt, and as he was a young boy with low physical strength, it took him dozens of slashes to cut through his hard bones. Crackle, crunch. A dull sound was heard. It was the sound of forcibly cutting through the bones, a sound that made one experience goosebumps just by hearing it. Kevin's face went red as if it would explode at any moment, and he didn't even know what he was doing anymore. However, he just hoped. Roman had told him he could become strong. For the first time in his life, a dream was created in his mind. And due to that dream, Kevin suppressed the pain and continued slashing. And finally, thud. He had completely cut off his hand. His body was now completely drained of strength, and unable to control his body anymore, he fell into a pool of his own blood. And then, everything disappeared as if it had been a mirage. The blood that was splattered on the floor, the hand that rolled over it, and even the pain that seemed as if it would tear his mind apart at any moment. All of that was suddenly gone. He didn't know how that happened, but what was certain was that he had passed the trial. From now onwards, you will live as my irreplaceable sword. Kevin's world suddenly changed. He got up despite his still not recovered spirit and fell on his face in front of Roman. I will follow my lord's orders. Roman. His life was going to be intertwined with Roman's for its remaining duration. Afterward, Roman parted ways with Kevin. When Roman returned to the room, Hans ran towards him while trembling. No, young master. Where are you hurt? There is blood on the sword. It's nothing. Still, Hans, who was checking Roman's body with a worried face, slowly moved his hand away after hearing the resolute voice. Young Master Roman is strong. Roman did not blink an eye even after subjugating the blood fang, so he knew that he was making a fuss over nothing. Also, there were no visible wounds. That meant the blood on Roman's sword belonged to someone else. Pfft. Tough brat. Roman laughed. In the incident with Kevin, Roman didn't want him to actually cut off his hand. He merely meant to test his will with a temporary illusion, but Kevin slashed down towards his hand before he could fall into the illusion completely. That was what resulted in the blood on the sword. Fortunately, the sword did not penetrate the flesh entirely due to Roman's quick reaction, but if the hallucination had been activated even a little later, Kevin's hand would have been completely cut off. He was tenacious. He wasn't the type of genius that is often praised, but his willpower was so great that no one could rival him in terms of that. And seeing Kevin swear his allegiance to him, Roman said in a blunt tone. The mana cultivation method I will teach you in the future is extremely dangerous. When your strength is low, the pain isn't that bad, but the stronger you get, the more the pain worsens. It gets much worse than the pain you experienced earlier. Still, there is only one reason why I will be teaching you that method. This is a way for a boy in his mid-teens, who doesn't even know the fundamentals of using mana, to quickly become strong, and if you master this technique to the fullest, you will definitely have the strength to protect those around you. Demonic spirit art. As it cannot be properly explained by the terms of this world, I will just call it a mana cultivation method. Hearing Roman's words, Kevin was in awe. In this world, the mana cultivation method was not something insignificant commoners could learn. Although the risk was significant, when Roman said he would teach him a mana cultivation method, Kevin had no choice but to doubt reality. Roman was, of course, a good person. He saved him from being beaten, subjugated the blood fang, and presented a previously unimaginable future to him, a mere commoner. But why? Why does he believe in him? Kevin might learn the mana cultivation method and run away, so he couldn't understand why Roman had trusted him blindly. So, he simply asked him, "Why do you trust me, young master?" Roman laughed. Kevin's words. They once again reminded him of the crazy demon. Once upon a time, the crazy demon was also an ordinary boy, and normally, there was no way he would be able to learn the martial arts of the demonic cult. He was only able to learn demonic spirit art through Roman. At first, he did not take Roman's consideration seriously, but after years of subjugating Murim, the crazy demon asked why Roman trusted him blindly. The answer was simple. In order to receive blind trust, I must first trust the other person, even if that results in me being betrayed. That was Roman's belief. It was simply blind trust. He didn't need a reason, he just believed in others. However, Roman didn't explain it to Kevin. Blind trust loses its value as soon as reasoning is added. Moreover, Roman never worried about betrayal throughout his life. The stronger the people who follow you, the bigger their heads get. But they all eventually realize how dangerous it is to betray the person known as Baek Jim-hyuk. That's why he ended the conversation with just that. And now, Roman stared intently at his sword. He remembered a madman with a sword stained with blood, and from now on, he will have to do his best with Kevin, who resembled the madman. Things are going to get busy for me. There were now 2 weeks until the party and about 6 months until the war. From now on, I have a lot to teach Kevin. Time is relative. While Kevin began to lead a fierce life, Chris had such a boring day that he wondered if it was okay to follow Roman. I'm bored. He yawned dozens of times. Chris saw Roman and Kevin training from a distance. Everything is about the foundation. Even if you do one thing, do it right. Don't lose your concentration. He knew what Roman was doing, but he couldn't understand it. Why on earth did you pick up a strange kid from somewhere and are trying to teach him swordsmanship? If the kid were a great genius, it would be understandable. However, Kevin was neither a great genius nor had a status that would make others teach him. He was just a commoner. Moreover, he didn't know anything about swordsmanship. A sigh eventually came out of Chris' mouth. When I decided to follow Roman, I could never have imagined something like this. I thought that if I followed Roman, I would learn the secret to becoming strong in a short time, just like he did. But what is this? He hasn't taught me anything yet. And unlike Kevin, he treats me as if I don't even exist. If I knew this would happen, I would have stuck with Master Jonathan and would have swung my sword at least one more time. That would have benefited me, at the very least. His stomach was boiling. He wanted to run to Roman and scream at him. Still, he endured it because he had decided to follow him. He thought if he waited patiently, Roman would eventually teach him. But... oh, fuck this. Thud. He threw his gloves on the ground. It's been a week already. Not being able to contain his anger after seeing Roman abandoning him and teaching only Kevin, Chris approached Roman and said, "Young Master Roman. It has been over 2 weeks since I started following the young master. The first week went by as you decided to go into closed-door seclusion, and you only practiced with Kevin for the second week. I sincerely apologize if you're doing this because you're not happy with me. Still, please teach me something like you are teaching Kevin. I am confident that I will be able to absorb your teachings well." His will was strong. Seeing him express his will, Roman turned his gaze away from Kevin and stared at Chris. Did I not tell you already? Watch and learn. Was it really meant to be watch and learn? Aren't you supposed to teach me something special? Chris was astonished. What does he mean? He thought that learning from those around him meant teaching, but he could not understand what Roman meant at all. Young master. Even though I suffered a disastrous defeat in our duel, I am a person who reached 2-star Aura Knight status in my mid-20s. I can't waste my talent like this. Chris' backlash was fierce. As he raised his voice as if he would not back down, Roman swallowed his feeling of laughing. It is as expected. He never thought Chris would tolerate being neglected forever. Roman said, "Everyone has their own way. Since Kevin is ignorant, he needs someone to set the right way for him and guide him from start to finish until he reaches a certain level. However, you are different. No matter what instruction I would give you, you wouldn't really understand it and try to swallow the teachings by force. Do you know why? That's because I'm the one who defeated you. All of that would inevitably result in your talents backfiring at you. So, are you telling me to keep watching? No. Roman waited for Chris to respond. Now was the time for him to show the reality to those who chose to follow him. In order to accept reality, we need definite results. How about it? Do you want to have a duel with Kevin once? If you think you are right even after the duel, then I will teach you directly. Roman's suggestion didn't make sense to Chris. A duel with Kevin? It's just bizarre. Chris' doubts were quickly resolved with Roman's explanation. The reason for the duel is simple. Kevin will fight against you by himself, but I'll be instructing him throughout the match on how to defeat you. So, prove your will to me by defeating Kevin, the avatar that will be my sword in the future. Roman's words were that of a madman. And Chris was undoubtedly angry. Does this bastard think I'm retarded? He admitted that he was defeated by Roman. Every morning, when I looked in the mirror, I looked at my missing teeth and thought about that moment countless times. However, this is just not it. The opponent is a beginner who clearly doesn't even know all the basics of swordsmanship. Whether it is a duel or not, how can he defeat me? Yeah, I see how it is. Breaking my teeth wasn't enough for you, huh? You want to tame me. What you want from me is blind loyalty. However, I'm not that easy. Even if it hurts someone loyal to you, the eldest son of Lord Dmitri, I can't stand still after being treated like this. His eyebrows were twitching. He truly wanted to do well. After speaking bitterly to my master and leaving the Dmitri Knights, I had a strong desire to accomplish many great things and return back to him. Moreover, I had to go for 2 weeks with no income. The dissatisfaction that had barely been suppressed until now exploded at Roman's provocations. Fine. Let's do this. I'm going to show you I'm not such a weakling. Chris thought that this time the result would be different. Chapter 21. Blind Trust. Part 3. Kevin was just as embarrassed as Chris was in the current situation. As it was a duel Kevin did not intend for, he said with a pale face, "Young master, are you saying that I should have a duel with Knight Chris? That's just nonsense. At best, I'm just a kid who's been practicing swordsmanship for a week, but isn't Knight Chris a skilled swordsman and a 2-star or a knight?" It was a natural reaction. Chris. Who was he? He was the disciple of Jonathan, the Dmitri Knights commander, and a genius swordsman recognized by all of Dmitri. He was definitely not an opponent that average swordsmen could fight. Moreover, Kevin wasn't even an average swordsman, he was just a teenage boy. No matter how much willpower he had, there are some battles in life where the outcome is obvious, no matter how much one tries. Roman said, "I know that you are at a disadvantage. Regardless, do you have anything to lose if you lose the duel?" I do not. There is something you need to keep in mind from now on, Kevin. There are countless others stronger than you in this world. Blood Fong, who oppressed your family and went as far as to use violence against them, was the same, and Chris, who is staring at you right now, is no different. Will you take a step backward every time because your opponent is stronger than you? If not, handle this situation differently. Kevin was young. In fact, he was just a boy who was in his mid-teens. He was still at an age that needed mental care, but as he chose to be Roman's sword, he needed to live differently from before. This duel is not a real battle. The only thing you will get from this fight is the frustration of being defeated and physical pain. Since it's like that, don't you think it's a great opportunity? You have a chance to let loose and use everything you've got against an enemy who is far stronger than you. I don't believe Chris can break your will. After all, you're someone who was willing to cut off their own arm in order to become stronger. The life of commoners, the life of an aristocrat, and even the life of a swordsman who is willing to sacrifice his life in order to become strong, no matter whose life it was, it had boundaries. Nevertheless, Roman looked at Kevin, who was still a teenager, and told him to completely break down the boundaries. Just like when he had told him to cut off his own hand, he now told him to face the enemy known as Chris. Even if this was a real battle, Kevin needed to prove his worth as a sword by dealing with the enemy. "What are you afraid of?" Gulp. Kevin swallowed his dry saliva. His relationship with Roman was a series of choices. Roman never forced him to take a single path and told him to walk on his own path while following him. His throat burned. Chris. He had to fight an opponent whom he had looked up to whenever watching the procession of the Dimitri Knights. It was a previously unimaginable reality, but from the moment he had cut off his hand, Kevin became a completely different person. "I will fight him. He has malice." Seeing Kevin's firm grip on the sword, Roman let out a small smile. Kevin and Chris. The two men looked at each other. Kevin's shabby physique and posture proved it was an unfavorable fight. Seeing that, Chris felt his blood gushing upside down. "I don't even need to compete with such a beginner to figure out who the victor will be." It was a miserable feeling. He looked at his opponent and noticed Kevin's posture was a mess. Nevertheless, he had thought there might have been a reason why Roman proposed a duel, but the appearance of Kevin holding a sword while looking at him completely shattered those thoughts. It was clear that he had no experience as a swordsman at all. At a glance, he was full of openings. In fact, Chris was skeptical of whether he could even defend properly with his unbalanced lower body. Kevin had been training only for a week. It was clear as day that there wasn't enough time to digest all the teachings Roman had given him. Kevin wasn't a genius at swordsmanship, as Chris had guessed. Moreover, he wasn't even qualified to be called a swordsman yet. That's why. Pathetic. Chris had that thought. Chris was currently 25 years old. He was taught swordsmanship by Jonathan from an early age. The time he spent shedding blood and sweat as a swordsman was much more than the time he lived as a commoner. It was definitely unlike any other commoner anyone had seen in Dimitri. His swordsmanship was his pride. In addition to his natural talent, he trained whilst aiming to become much stronger than anyone else. Due to that, he achieved the feat of earning the title of 2-star or a knight just in his mid-20s. Moreover, if he manages to achieve 3-star before becoming 30 years old, he, who was considered only a genius, could possibly become the most powerful swordsman in the Kingdom of Cairo. That's who Chris is. Just because he's rotting in Dimitri does not mean his talent can be ignored. I don't know what you're thinking, but you're wrong this time, young master. Variables also have limits. If I lose this duel against Kevin, I will completely give up my life as a swordsman. It was a desperate promise to himself. In his mind, he didn't want to duel with Kevin. However, the only reason he was standing with his sword until he made up his mind to fight Kevin was because of the look in his eyes. "Everything about you is annoying." His eyes were clearly filled with malice. It was evident that Kevin was serious. He was showcasing a sincere attitude as if he could truly defeat Chris. Due to that, Chris got even angrier. His opponent had no idea what was going on. He did not know how meek and lowly he was, and was trying to deal with Chris, a knight who had dedicated himself to the sword for decades, even though he had barely begun understanding basic swordsmanship. Chris acknowledged Roman's strength in the past. That was because Roman, whose swordsmanship he had experienced directly, was a man deserving of his acknowledgement. However, only seeing Kevin's gaze made his blood boil and made him want to punish him. "I'll finish it within a minute." Grip. He clenched his sword firmly. Just then. Start. Roman gave the signal. As soon as Roman signaled for the duel to begin, Chris instantly kicked the ground. There was no reason for him to waste time on this duel. Chris instantly dug into one of Kevin's openings and attacked him, who had not yet come to his senses. Smack. A dull sound was heard. He didn't know if it was intentional or a coincidence, but Kevin barely blocked Chris' attack. However, just then, the difference in their strength caused Kevin's arms to shrink. Kevin tried to cover his exposed chest with a bewildered expression, but Chris' kick hit his stomach first. Thud. Cook! He screamed. It was such a shock that Chris knocked him over with just one kick. Now, Kevin was lying flat on the floor. Clearly, the duel had ended with just one attack. Chris didn't push his opponent further but glanced at Roman to see how he was judging the situation. "Are you sure you want to continue seeing this match?" Nevertheless, Roman remained calm. He explained the rules of the match silently, so Chris turned his gaze away and immediately attacked Kevin. "Let's finish it at once." His sword was aimed at the opponent's arm. Kevin, who had been moaning in pain until now, jumped up from the ground when he saw Chris attacking him. To dodge that, he threw himself to the side. At that moment, the sound of the floor cracking rang in Kevin's ears. He understood that if he had been hit, it wouldn't have been strange if his arm had been broken. Naturally, his whole body was covered in goosebumps now. The difference in their skill was clear as day. Chris was a mountain that Kevin couldn't climb. However, Kevin still initiated a counterattack right after dodging the attack by swinging his sword. Swish. The sound of the sword was different this time. It was slow and light. Chris simply let him attack and dodged without hesitation. Once again, he kicked Kevin's abdomen. Thud. Cuck. Kevin swallowed a cry. Kevin, who had previously pushed past the pain of cutting off his hand, staggered with a face that looked like it would explode at any moment. However, he did not fall even with the strong impact of the kick. He barely took a step and avoided the follow-up attack from Chris, but Kevin was so helpless and weak that continuing this duel was virtually pointless. It was literally a one-sided confrontation. Indeed, it was strange. Roman had offered a duel as if Kevin would win on his own, but he failed to demonstrate even the basics of swordsmanship, let alone winning the duel. What the hell were you thinking, allowing him to fight? 10 steps away from Chris, Roman was silently watching the duel. The meaning of the duel was to use Kevin, teach him how to fight in a duel, and make him grow up. In the end, the duel was going as expected. The situation would not have changed even if Roman had taught him a secret method, but he was rather angry at the futile duel. Smack. Facing continuous attacks from Chris, Kevin's arms trembled. Clearly, his willpower alone could not withstand Chris' attacks, and while his posture was disturbed, Chris's attacks burst all over Kevin's body. Ironically, it was Chris' way of showing mercy. Even though the duel was fought using a wooden sword, Chris deliberately did not use the sword to attack his vitals, hoping his opponent would not be fatally injured. Even just that, inevitably, showed the difference in their skills. Even if Kevin struggled with his incredible willpower, he couldn't get over the wall known as Chris, who had been training with a sword for decades. In the end, smack. Ugh. A fist to his stomach left him choking on his own blood. Kevin staggered while struggling to stay on his knees, and Chris raised an angry voice and said to Kevin, "Give up." The fight was clearly over. Even though he had already had several chances to finish it, Chris only cared about winning by making him submit. Regardless, Kevin endured. Grasping his trembling leg, he aimed his sword at Chris as if trying to block the next attack that would come his way. "Why the hell are you doing this?" Kevin's current appearance was the definition of miserable. As he had rolled over the ground several times, his clothes had become ragged, and his torn top revealed a reddish abdomen. Furthermore, he was currently spewing blood out of his mouth. It was clear that he had suffered a tremendous shock to his internal organs, and as blood leaked out of them, his heart cooled down. That was his limit. This could be a really dangerous situation for him. However, even though victory and defeat were clear as crystal, Kevin's appearance of him still aiming his sword at Chris was beyond his understanding. Don't assume you're a talented person just because you've been attacked only a few times. From the beginning, and throughout the match, I never did my best. I could have smashed your tofu-like head at any given moment, but I showed mercy since this was a duel. That's the difference between you and me. I don't know what you were thinking when you accepted this duel, but for a normal person who doesn't even know how to use mana, I think you've done well considering how much you endured. Chris simply told the truth. Back when he had fought Roman, it was, obviously, different. He couldn't defeat Roman even though he gave it his all. However, for Kevin, he didn't even need to do his best. It was truly sad and regretful. That made Kevin feel even more miserable. Also, this was as patient as Chris could be. I will say this one last time. Give up. If you show the will to fight anymore, I will cripple at least one of your limbs. Truly, it was his last warning. It was the last mercy he would show to Kevin in this duel. Kevin is just a puppet. He had no reason to offend Chris. However, when he was told to admit the reality, a smile appeared on Kevin's face, much to Chris' surprise. Kiki. He suddenly started laughing. As if he didn't mind smiling, Kevin didn't even bother to hide the laughter that rose from within. Then, he said while smiling, "Let's go all the way." He gripped the sword tightly. He knew that what Chris had said was correct. However, this one-sided duel was completely different in Kevin's mind. That was because, from the start until now, Kevin was following Roman's instructions and had no intention of giving up in this duel without Roman's orders. Chapter 22. Blind Trust. Part 4. When the duel began, Kevin heard a familiar voice in his ears. "Raise your sword and block the front. Chris will attempt a surprise attack." It was Roman's voice. Kevin hadn't ever heard of someone transmitting their voice through mana, so he was unsure what to do for a moment. There was a slight hesitation. He couldn't fully understand what had happened to him, but when he realized that Roman was the owner of the voice, he instinctively followed what he said. And then... clack! His hand felt numb. He had only raised his sword to block the front, as Roman had instructed, but he unknowingly blocked Chris's preemptive attack as well. Move to the side. After that, aim for Chris' chest as he tries to kick you. Kevin wanted to follow Roman's next command. However, his reaction speed was slower than expected, and Chris' kick that Roman had predicted had hit his stomach before he even saw it. Thud. Quack. He naturally screamed. His breath stopped in his throat for a moment, and Kevin, who had fallen to the floor, grabbed his stomach. Afterward, thick saliva dripped from his mouth. Kevin had cut off his hand just a week ago. Nevertheless, the pain was hard to get used to. Just then. Throw yourself to the right. A voice penetrated his mind. Kevin knew that in order to stand a chance, he had to obey the commands. He forced himself to ignore the pain and threw himself to the right while seeing Chris swinging his sword at him, as Roman had expected. Attack Chris' left side of the chest. There was an opening. Chris swung his sword broadly, which created an opening, and Kevin knew that he would be able to defeat him in a single blow if he attacked him now. However, this time as well, the attack was unsuccessful due to Kevin's lack of ability. His speed of swinging the sword was slow enough for Chris to yawn, and the attack couldn't reach Chris due to his tangled steps. In short, it was a complete failure. It was so bad that Chris didn't even know that his opponent was aiming for his opening. It was an attack that could be easily avoided, and with Chris' counterattack, Kevin was once again kicked in the stomach. Thud. Cook. It was a one-sided fight. Kevin was being struck without even being able to counterattack. He wanted to sit down immediately because his blood had come up, and he was suffering from excruciating pain. Regardless, the words of giving up did not come out of his mouth even once. Aside from the fact that Roman hadn't given him an order to give up, what was happening now was also funny. Young Master Roman is omnipotent. Chris is acting like a puppet and doing the exact actions the young master predicts. Roman's voice was akin to a prophecy. When he said Chris was going to attack from the right, the same thing happened in reality. Moreover, Roman's instructions also gave him an opportunity to actually knock Chris down. However, Chris' skills were much higher than Kevin's. Thus, Kevin was unable to fight or follow Roman's instructions that well. If he could follow Roman's advice, this was a duel that Chris would have lost right at the beginning, but his useless body wasn't able to follow the simple instructions. How funny. Chris is a 2-star or a knight. He's someone that ordinary people like myself look up to, but young Master Roman is playing with him as if he were in the palm of his hand. Kevin now understood. Why did Roman send him to have a duel with Kevin? Roman was telling him something indirectly. This is the level of young Master Roman. Even Chris, known as Dimitri's greatest genius, can't even touch his feet when we compare their true abilities. Such a person is the young master I will be loyal to for the rest of my life. And, even if he instructs me to do something that is out of the boundaries of common sense, I have to blindly follow what he says. His way forward and his future goals, along with them, a figure of Roman appeared in front of him. Just as when he had followed Roman's words and cut off his own hand, he now developed a blind trust that if he followed Roman, he would definitely be able to become stronger. In just one match, Roman had given him the basis for why he should put his faith in him and follow him. At the same time, he also showed why he should be respected. Kevin now ignored the physical pain and completely immersed himself in the duel, so Chris' warning didn't work. I will say this one last time. Give up. If you show the will to fight anymore, I will cripple at least one of your limbs. Truly, it was his last warning. Kevin chuckled. Is he telling me to give up? It doesn't matter. Chris doesn't know the truth, that he is a puppet. Young Master Roman is someone who can toy with a knight like Chris. But then, why would he train me, a boy in his teens with no talent? No matter how much I think about it, there is only one answer. Trust and loyalty. If my body is weak, then I need to prove my mental strength isn't. Let's go all the way. That sentence was Kevin's decision. Even if this battle got even more bloody, Kevin wanted to prove his worth. Their perspective and the world they saw were completely different. Chris didn't understand Kevin's determination, so he exploded at the sight of Kevin, who didn't give up until the very end. Clack. His patience had now entirely run out. The heart that earlier felt pity for his opponent was now filled with rage. You don't even know your place. Tap tap. He kicked off the ground violently. Chris had initially thought Kevin had nothing to do with this. However, it's a different story if he ignores the decades Chris had devoted to the sword and shows the spirit of a fighter who does not give up until the end. Now, there was a need to win this fight overwhelmingly and make Kevin regret his mistake for the rest of his life. As a result of the disastrous choice he had made, he would need to live with the consequence of being crippled. Chris was swift. Like a ray of light, he dug into Kevin's opening in an instant and swung his sword at an unbelievable speed while aiming for his opponent's shoulder. Losing his arm, that was the price he would have to pay for his mistake. However, the moment the wooden sword was about to cut his arm, Kevin took a step forward. One step forward. Clack. Chris' eyes went wide. One step forward, that was a safe spot. Still, it was like presenting his head where the wooden sword would fall, and it was also similar to the time Roman defeated Chris. Nevertheless, Kevin did not hesitate. Even knowing he might die, he stepped forward. That gave him a chance to attack before his opponent. And then, attack with all your might. He followed his master's orders. Kevin clenched his teeth and swung his sword from the bottom up, and a crude blow split the wind and aimed at his opponent. It was extremely close. Their bodies were entangled. And as a result, crack! There was the sound of something breaking. While dripping blood, a man's body fell backward like a puppet with a broken thread. With his momentary victory, the winner stood right there. Tenacious bastard. The winner was Chris. As he looked at him with weary eyes, he saw blood flowing from Kevin. Clearly, the fight was now over. And fortunately, Kevin's life was not in danger. Due to Kevin's different fighting style, Chris had to overcome the crisis by blocking the subsequent attack with the wooden sword. It only tore his skin as it rubbed against his forehead. However, the wooden sword was broken due to the powerful blow. And in the final kick that dug into his stomach, Kevin, whose pain had accumulated and become unbearable, fell backward. He was really tenacious. His will to see the match until the end, even though it could endanger his life, made complicated emotions arise in Chris and changed the way he looked at Kevin. Nevertheless, the winner was Chris. While taking care of Kevin, Roman said, "As promised, if you want, I will teach you from tomorrow. From now on, the choice is yours." That was the end of it. Roman was now busy treating Kevin's wounds as if Chris wasn't even there anymore. Nevertheless, it was an ironic scene. Roman was the one who had made Kevin fight recklessly in the duel, but he was now treating Kevin as if he was extremely precious to him. Why the hell did I fight? Chris returned home while lost in thought. He initially intended to get Roman's attention by defeating Kevin, but the unexpected development had now complicated his thoughts. In fact, accepting the duel was already his loss. In a lose-lose battle, Chris was overwhelmed by Kevin's resilience, especially in the last part. At that moment, Chris remembered his past. It was like young Master Roman. The judgment of taking a step forward was both a perfect attack and a perfect defense. What if? What if I hadn't experienced the same judgment while fighting Roman? That duel is still a source of shame for me, but I am not sure if I could have completely dodged Kevin's attack without using mana. Memories became experiences. He reacted quickly to the situation only because he had pondered that moment countless times in his head. That was exactly why Chris tried to counterattack after dodging Kevin's attack. A strange thrill arose in him thinking about that. Even though the opponent was just an ordinary person, Chris burst out laughing, shockingly realizing the fact that he had improved from the past. Roman didn't teach him anything, but he still made progress. Only the experience of fighting Roman became the foundation for his development and helped him become a swordsman who could respond differently in the same situation. Not only that. Looking back, Kevin's judgments were outstanding. I thought young Master Roman hadn't given Kevin any instructions, but now it feels like he did. Honestly, if Kevin had been a little quicker and stronger than a commoner, that last judgment might have made me the loser. Chris recalled the memories of his duel. He imagined failing a surprise first strike and getting a counterattack, and thought of another way to deal with it. He carefully analyzed each moment. Looking at each one, he tried to figure out how Roman judged situations. I thought young Master Roman was Dimitri's fool, just like the rumors floating around. However, I lost the duel with him back then, and this time, I gained confidence by playing a duel with Kevin. Young Master Roman is not just a genius. I can't understand him no matter how much I try. However, I am certain of one thing. He's reached a level that even my mentor, Knights Captain Jonathan, can't reach. He couldn't even begin to fathom the realm Roman was living and thinking in. It was not just about physical strength, but the world that Roman's mind saw was different. What does he even see? Just by clashing swords with Roman once and only trying to understand Roman's judgment in the duel, his mind was mixed with countless teachings. It was a world he had never experienced when he was in the Dimitri Knights. The more he analyzed his own experience, the more Chris came out with pure admiration. He could now see the meaning of what Roman earlier said. He didn't mean to simply stay by his side, but he meant to look at him and find a way to become stronger by himself. Was I such an idiot? Pfft. He began laughing. Now that he thought about it, Roman had given him a lot of hints. While teaching Kevin, he said a lot of things directed at Chris, but as he was teaching the basics, Chris did not pay much attention to it. He rejected them due to prejudice. As he was a swordsman who had reached a certain level, he bowed his head to learn, but he did not believe he was in the position to receive basic instructions. But now I understand. Just by watching Roman, analyzing and improving himself, he could reach a different level. I, Chris, don't know you properly yet. The Roman Dimitri I remember is a flawed human being called Dimitri's fool, but what you've shown me lately is beyond my understanding. What is certain is that I acknowledge you. From now on, by your side, I will observe and learn everything until I surpass you. It was a promise to himself. Talking to himself, Chris had set a new goal. And the next day, Chris went to Roman and said, "You do not need to teach me yourself, young master. I will find a way to become stronger by myself while following you." That day, Chris thought that until he surpassed Roman, he would live as Roman's sword. However, did he know, these remarks he spat out with blood were a lifelong vow to decide which lord he would follow for the rest of his life. And it was also the moment his future in Cairo had been decided. Eventually, time passed. A week later. Today was the day of Barco's banquet.